These are veterans of the Second World War, restored with pride by Walt Lannon and Vern Hupp of Oliver. They're known as Harvards, 2 tons of aircraft that in the Second World War were used as fighters, bombers, but mostly as trainers. Through an organization known as the Commonwealth Air Training Program, more than 100,000 young men from all over the world, 17, 18, 19 years of age, came to Canada to learn how to fly these at bases all over the country. And once they learned, they went off to the theaters of war in Europe and the Pacific. And you know, sometimes their instructors were not much older than they were. Although his picture makes him look older, Owen Favell was just 20 years old when he was an instructor in the Commonwealth Air Training Program. Now retired in Penticton, Owen had memories of his war service flood back when a film he'd made in 1944 was returned to him from the National Archives, where it had been gathering dust for nearly 60 years. In this episode of Pioneers in Places, Owen Favell tells us his story. Welcome to Pioneers in Places. Mike Roberts with you, and my guest tonight is Owen Favell. Now, we would take 7 programs to really do justice to Owen Favell, but the part of Owen that we're going to be doing tonight is his role in the Commonwealth Air Training Program that occurred here in Canada and other Commonwealth countries during the Second World War. But this man is a bit of a fascinating character, as I think you'll discover. When did you discover you had a love of flying, first of all, Owen?
Oh, heavens, I was a very small boy, I think. I started making model airplanes with the elastic band propulsion.
Yeah.
And they just went from there. I used to fly them in the park, and I actually gained the zenith of what we would hope to do. I flew at airplanes that were lost, that flew away. Twice I flew. I did that before I was 12 years old.
But when did you decide to climb aboard a creation?
Oh, heavens, I wanted to fly from day one, I suppose. But it was out of bounds, out of reach for anybody of our generation. My father we weren't wealthy, and we didn't even have a car. So it was the war that made it possible, of course. The exploits of Barder and all the other great heroes were enough to turn any young boy to flying.
And you were young, what, 16 and a half, 17?
I was 16 and a half when war broke out, and the Air Force wouldn't take anybody until they were 17 and a half. So in the meantime, well, when the threat of invasion came, I joined the Home Guard, of course. And after that, I also joined the Air Cadets, and of course I thought that might be an intro into it. And when I was 17 and a half, I galloped down and joined up.
Joined up. And now, what's the technique? I just contemplate, war is underway. They need everything. They need Army, Navy, Air Force. But you said, I want to fly. What was your technique?
Well, mainly it was the fact that I had been in the Air Cadets, and I had a little sort of book showing I'd been there and what I had learned about navigation and so on, and they thought that showed sufficient interest to put me into aircrew, at least. That's the first designation. They don't pick out a pilot as such. You're designated as aircrew and interviewed and go on from there.
But how come you turned out to be an instructor in the Commonwealth Air Training Program instead of an ace over Europe?
That, of course, was a process of learning to fly, and then having got my wings at Medicine Hat, being probably, my name begins with F, so number 10, they wanted 10 instructors, so that's how I would be chosen.
I mean, they would just go down the first 10 in the list and...
I can't imagine the Air Force doing it any other way.
Well, what about the great instructors who had names like Moore and Smith?
Well, that was before my time, I think.
And here you are at 17 and a half, 18, in Canada, By yourself?
In
Well, I mean,
Canada.
with a bunch of
Well,
others.
yes, with a bunch. No, actually, it was in, I was, what, 18 by then, and we came to Assiniboia. It was number 34 Elementary Flying School, Assiniboia in Saskatchewan, and for 2-3 months, and I learned to fly. I soloed at 7 hours and found it delightful and wonderful and exciting and wonderful weather. It was just a dream for me.
And the war didn't intervene for you.
It was I'm afraid, it sounds terrible to say, but it was a good war.
The other reason I find it so great to talk with you is that you made a film of your life in the Commonwealth Air Training Program and only recently rediscovered its existence.
That came about after graduation from Medicine Hat. We went to, I was chosen to be an instructor. So at Trenton, and then I came back out to Canada, first of all to place De Winton, which is just south of Calgary, and finally to High River. And I had bought a movie camera, this cheap German, well, it was a good German camera. The reason it was cheap was because it had magazines which had to be loaded in a dark room by hand, which was a real chore. But anyway, I had this movie camera, and the manager of the station, because the elementary flying schools were all managed by civilians, he saw me with the camera and suggested I make a film of the activities of the station, and that's exactly how it came about.
Okay, I'm going to take a break here, be back in just a moment, and we'll begin to have a look at some of the film and talk about some of the events of an instructor in the Commonwealth Air Training Program in Canada during the Second World War, right after this break. Welcome to Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts talking with Owen Favell, instructor in the Commonwealth Air Training Program during the Second World War. How did this film begin? What was your technique for starting off the show?
Well, I had a partner, Mr. Tom Snellgrove. He was actually the engineering officer, a civilian, and he was technically the producer. So we just followed a student's progress, arriving at the station with his kit bags, dumping off, marching onto the station, and then going through the various procedures, including how to handle a parachute, how to ground school, and of course the inevitable parades and marching, and ultimately, of course, to the day when he starts to fly. And it follows him through from his first solo to the end of the film, where he's a graduate pilot. At least he hasn't got his wings, but he's a graduate pilot capable of handling an airplane, and he leaves the station in the same bus, presumably, that he arrived in.
This is a process that 250,000 people went through to learn how to fly, to fight for the Allies in the Second World War.
Yeah, well, that of course includes air gunners, bomb aimers, and navigators, and wireless operators. So it was a fairly large, comprehensive, it was everybody that was going to fly in an airplane rather than just the pilots, because there were many other skills had to be learned.
You had to teach people who were of Polish extraction, Norwegian, French. What's the language? How did you cope with that?
Actually, at instructor school, we were taught a kind of a jargon. We called it patter practice. And we actually, in bed at night, the two of us, we would do these patter practice to each other. And now, as you approach, as the aircraft approaches the ground, you will then bring the stick gently back, and so on and so forth. And we had to use the same words. So probably there were only about 200 words in total that we would ever use in instructing.
So the first few days of teaching a person whose English was not their first language was, here's your 200 words, this is the order I'm going to say them.
It was about the size of it. The only one foreigner well, if we call it that, was a Norwegian. And he spoke good English, so I was never faced with a problem.
Never a problem. And you had to have other systems, I would imagine. Did you have some sort of mnemonic device to make sure that you did all of your checks properly, for example?
Oh yes, we had a whole program. I mean, and in the student's logbook, he would log all the different exercises that he did, and I mean, it was everything from landing, takeoff, to spins, aerobatics, and of course navigation. Navigation was important, and even night flying. We taught some night flying at elementary flying school. Not a lot. They didn't go solo, but we at least gave them the experience and gave them the chance to know what it was like.
How many students did you take, and how long did you have them? Per class, I suppose.
Yeah, we usually had between 3 and 4, and there were usually 3 aeroplanes assigned to us. So once we got them up solo, then some would be flying solo, and while I would be instructing the others. And it would take usually 2 months at elementary flying school of concentrated flying before they were competent.
How much flying would you do a day?
Oh, I don't suppose we did more than 3 hours a day actual flying, but of course there was always a lot of what we called hangar flying, where you would be talking about their mistakes usually, and how to correct them, and how to approach them, and getting to know the pupils. It was important. We had to get a very good relationship going. There was no bullying. Bullying never worked in the air. It had to be a cooperative venture.
It was subtlety, because anything unsubtle would result in a bad noise.
Oh yes, actually though, of course there was the other problem was not letting the pupil go too far. A good friend of mine, his name was Doug Jones down east, he let one fellow go too far and he dropped the aeroplane in from about 10 feet. They walked away from it, but the aeroplane was a sorry sight. But so the part of the skill is allowing them to get into trouble, make a mistake, and still keep them alive.
Some died.
There were about 1,000 died, instructors and pupils, throughout the Commonwealth Air Training, in the 4 years of the Commonwealth Air Training Plan.
Out of 250,000 who went through?
They were totally, yes. Some of them were very, very unfortunate accidents, especially when the multi-engine training, where they might have a navigator, a wireless operator on board at the same time. And so there'd be 4 or 5 people would die in one crash. So it would take many, but where we were, it was just, well, at High River, for instance, in the 4 years, there were 4 died, 1 instructor and 3 pupils in the 4 years, which was actually a better than average performance, we thought.
And what would be the cause of these? Pilot error in most cases, or did the wings come off from overuse?
I have known wings come off, and that's another story, but generally it was pilot error. Sometimes overconfidence was probably a greater problem than lack of confidence in flying, because I would say most of the problems were caused by overconfidence.
And how would overconfidence manifest itself? Trying to do an outside loop too close to the ground? Or?
Well, in this one case in Medicine Hat, there was, it was a Belgian chap, and he was doing slow rolls in front of his girlfriend's farmhouse, and he clipped the ground and killed himself. So, I mean, that wasn't the standard type, but it was, at the same time, it was not unknown for people to kill themselves that way.
Somehow how it happened.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, going to take a break here, be back in a second with more of Owen Favell talking about the Commonwealth Air Training Program right after these words. Pioneers and Places, Mike Roberts talking with Owen Favell of, well, Penticton these days, but in the days we're talking, High River and teaching in the Commonwealth Air Training Program. How did you separate the, I don't know, the bomber pilots from the fighter pilots? What made the difference?
Actually, there was, after getting one's wings at service flying school, the assessment was made usually by the flight commander, and he would simply take the view, is he a fast-moving, go-getting sort of chap, or is he the steady, quiet, steady bomber pilot? So it's always subjective, of course, and they weren't always right, but they would be fed into the appropriate category, and more on personality than on skills.
Would you say? I mean, when you'd go through your students, you'd say fighter pilot, bomber pilot. So you'd make the decision early?
It would appear. It would become obvious after a while. There are some fellows, they just are steady and they're not particularly quick to move, and others, they'll move before they should, and maybe they're the ones that should go into the fighters.
And how did you know if you had a washout or not? I mean, when you needed so many pilots to fight the war, who washed out? Actually,
some people were just basically inept, and there was just no way, and it was very often about the second or third hour it became apparent. Rarely were they washed out after going solo, or occasionally they would reach a point where they just couldn't solo. 7 hours was a good time to solo, but some went even to 10 or 11. But very often they would still make the grade. But if they were too long, then their ability to learn was obviously not great.
But as you pointed out, you needed other disciplines as well. I mean, not only just pilots and co-pilots, but navigators and everybody else.
Oh yes, very quickly they would be. They'd go into the pool of aircrew, such as navigators and wireless operators and air gunners, and even pilots who had only just failed would make good bomb aimers because they very often might have to fly the aircraft at the last moment if the pilot was rendered unconscious. We didn't have co-pilots on the British bombers like the Americans did.
How did you teach, I know, dogfighting or, you know, air-to-air combat?
We did all our air gunnery and air-to-air combat at a satellite station. And those aircraft were fitted differently from the regular training. We had no guns on the regular aircraft.
Now, the planes you're training these guys on are not the hot tamales that they're going to eventually fly. I mean, and is this an Anson?
No, we were flying Cornells.
Cornells.
It only had a 300 horsepower engine, and it was pretty underpowered. But that was actually good in a way because it meant you had to handle it carefully. It taught skill. With a very, very powerful aircraft, it'll sometimes pull you out of trouble. But in a Cornell, you wouldn't get into the trouble in the first place because you didn't have any power to pull you out of it.
How long before you got into something that really had some snap? I guess the Avenger's not a very snappy, but pretty decent plane.
Well, the Harvard actually became the love. I think everybody who ever flew a Harvard would think back and say, yes, that's the airplane I would like to fly. Even Spitfire pilots later on would look back with nostalgia on the Harvard.
Why? What made it such a good plane?
It was a powerful engine, a powerful airplane, and it did a lot of things, all the things you would want it to do, just about.
Because they still are flying today. I mean,
heavens.
they're being refurbished and flown everywhere as what do they call them, warbirds?
The warbirds. Oh yeah, no, they were beautifully built, very, very strong and safe, and they would do rolls and loops and everything you would want it to do.
And we're a solid platform.
And solid platform, yeah, very comfortable.
What's the hottest plane you ever flew?
That was it.
You never got into a Spitfire or a Mustang?
No, I'm afraid as instructors we were confined, in fact, to the Cornell in the end. That was all the most, and until finally we got back to England after the war, and I ended up flying Tiger Moths again, and this time training glider pilots. I don't know what for, but
there you were. Now, how would you assess the job that was done by the Air Commonwealth Training Program?
I think it was almost a genius who invented it because, in point of fact, it was the British government made a deal with private flying clubs, and it was a perfect mix of private enterprise and government, which made it the success that it was. Because the flying clubs, they had the experience. They had some facilities already, and the British government paid for the introduction of link trainers and further hangars and all the rest of it. But it was that mix, I think, that made it so great.
Now, having a private contractor doing the government's bidding sometimes rankles, but it works.
It worked then, and I think it was a great experience for us at elementary flying school because of the girls. I mean, we had girls, when they had Tiger Moths, they were flipping the props on them. And then later on in Cornells, they would remove the chocks and they would gas up the planes. And then in the flight office, there was always a girl there handling the logbooks. So we were surrounded by females, which was very, very pleasant, I must say.
It's not like your usual military training.
Well, that's true. But on the other hand, there was really no, shall we say, diversions, because really flying was what we wanted to do. We loved to fly. We all were so keen and excited about flying that it was almost a mania, and the ladies were just decoration.
And efficient decoration at that.
Very nice, too.
Now, let's get back to this film for a second, because here you did produce the film, and we've been seeing the images of it today. And to my mind, this is treasure material, because where do you get color film of World War II training? Well, you got it from this. What happened to the film?
Well, it was 500 feet of Kodachrome, and after I never saw it. I was posted. So the manager had this film, and he edited it or put it together, and presumably enjoyed seeing it. But when I tracked it down after the war in the 50s, the film actually had been so badly stored that you couldn't project it. So there was a branch of the National Film Board in Calgary at the time. I took it there. And the fellow said, well, we'll see what we can do. But 2 weeks later, when I went back, nobody knew anything about it. And it wasn't until last year that it came to light in the National Archives.
So from the 50s, it disappeared until 2001.
Yeah.
And how did you find out about it in 2001? I mean, a lot of your people your age aren't around anymore.
Well, it was circulating, actually. The film, it was a silent film. It was circulating. It had been very badly edited. But people would accept it as it was, and so quite a few flying clubs actually had copies of it. The Glenbow Museum had several copies available, in Calgary, that is. It wasn't particularly interesting because it wasn't edited very well, and now I've put the voiceover and the sound effects. It's caught a lot more attention.
It took you back.
Oh, yes.
How did that affect you?
It affected me very much because of the presence of my friend. He was the best man at my wedding, and we bunked together for almost the whole time I was flying. And he died in an accident just before we returned to England.
This is whom?
Smokey Eden. Yeah. Call him Smokey.
Yeah? Everybody had a nickname?
Well, his name was Henry, and nobody would call anybody Henry.
Did anybody call you Owen?
No, as a matter of fact, I was called Joe.
Joe?
Yeah. So people called you, what they wanted to do.
You know, when I take a look at your photographs, I see a man who looks remarkably like you. I mean, you had that mature look, if you'll pardon the expression, as you were a young guy. What happened to the hair?
Well, I'm afraid I lost my hair early. I used to claim it was pulling on a flying helmet that rubbed the hair off, of course. That was a line we used to pull. But when on my 21st birthday, they celebrated it by picking all the hairs off the barbershop floor and gluing them together and making this horrible, repulsive mat and making me wear it.
A wig for Owen Favell. Thank you very much for a fascinating story. The Commonwealth Air Training Program in Canada. You know, we had a man here named Cliff Renfrew, who was considered to be the father of aviation in the Okanagan, who disappeared from the Okanagan and went to Commonwealth Air Training and Ferry Command beyond that. Did you ever run into him?
I'm afraid not.
No?
No. There were a lot of us.
Owen Favell, resident of Penticton, but with a bent for filmmaking that gave us the treasure you've seen tonight. Join us again next time for another Pioneers in Places.